So first and foremost, welcome everyone to OuterBox's July webinar focused around prepping for the student leasing season, which we know is quickly coming up in the calendar. So we're super excited to have you all here today. We've got a great presentation with our housing experts. Just before we dive into intros and set the agenda, I want to go over a couple of logistics and housekeeping things just to make sure we get those out of the way. So first and foremost, I want to let everyone know we cannot see or hear you. We want this to be interactive, so that's why we have the chat and the Q&A, but do not worry, we can't hear any background noise or anything like that. But definitely use the Q&A. I'll be monitoring it throughout the session so that Zach and Kat can get your questions answered as they're presenting. If anything doesn't get answered during the presentation, we'll make sure to save it for the end because there will be a time set aside for live Q&A as well. But feel free to put anything that kind of, comes up as they're speaking. We want to make sure we get those questions answered at the right time. We are also recording this session, and we have a copy of the presentation that we'll be sending out to attendees as well. So we want to make sure you can reference back to it. If you had a colleague or coworker that maybe wasn't able to attend today or you need to jump early, once we process the video recording, tomorrow we'll send out a copy of it along with the deck so that you can see it. So that's really all I have for housekeeping items. I'm going to hand it over to Zach to start intros and set the agenda, and we'll go.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really excited to have everybody joining us today to talk about how we can create a stronger student leasing season. For those of you who I've not had the pleasure to meet, I wanted to do a quick little introduction. So I previously worked for Grow Marketing. Grow Marketing is now OuterBox. So I've been in the industry coming up on 8 years now. And throughout that entire time, I have specialized in student housing marketing strategy, the paid media for it, and the analytics for it as well. Love helping teams turn data into better leasing decisions. And for a little fun fact, I always like to throw something in there. I am a proud owner of roughly 40,000 Halloween and Christmas/holiday lights in my HOA. It's pretty crazy. They get a little let's just say supportive about it. But joining me today is Kat. Really excited to have her joining us today. Kat, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Zach. My name's Kat Callender. So I work for OuterBox as a lead market analyst. And I have roughly about a decade of experience understanding student audiences. Some of my experience comes from more of the consulting side and education side. And about 4.5 years is going to be working within the multifamily housing industry. A fun fact about myself, I own roughly a little over 100 houseplants. I will not say how many over 100, but just know it's a lot. And they're all cared for very well.
Love it. Kat, I think inquiring minds want to know what the actual number is. Do you have an actual number?
I know. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. That sounds good to me. I love it. So we'll talk a little bit about the agenda. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but we've got a lot of good content planned for you all. And first things first, we want to talk about really what we see is one of the most important things, especially if you're using an agency for your marketing. So agency client partnerships really truly can be your biggest competitive advantage when it comes to marketing for your student housing properties. Whenever we are working with our property management firms or ownership groups, really the most data that we get that's going to help us perform the best is just going to be what's happening on the ground. What do your leases look like? And so with consistent leasing data being sent from your site teams or from your marketing teams to our team, we can make smarter media investment decisions and align that ad spend with actual leasing performance so that we can be more successful on our end. This also allows us to quickly reallocate budgets. We can capitalize on, demand that we might be seeing. If you're closing a lot of leases in a particular week, let's get in front of more people. Maybe that's a better time to increase our budget or adjust our targeting strategies there. It also helps us evolve our campaign strategy, change the messaging, right? The more data, again, we are getting from your site teams, the better that we're able to perform on our end. And this also allows us to provide proactive recommendations. The biggest thing for us is it's hard to recommend what we should be doing on our end if we're not entirely sure what's happening on the actual site. So communicating with your marketing team or your agency is crucial in this world that we're in today. So the biggest part of what we do is try to turn these leasing insights into an actual marketing strategy. So first things first, we want the leasing data so that then we have all of the real-time leasing performance. We have our market signals so that then we can transfer that into insights. What is everything looking like? How many clicks are we getting versus what your actual closing percentage might be on site? And then once we have those insights, we can develop our targeted strategies, our recommendations to better optimize for your campaigns. And then towards the end of that, that's where we start really seeing those results so that we can fill your communities ideally as quickly as possible. Awesome. And Kat, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Zach. So next, we're going to talk about some common marketing pitfalls that cost properties leads during the leasing season. So a handful of these issues can fall under a myriad of problems. The first one is going to be timing pitfalls. So a couple examples that we have for timing pitfalls. The first one's going to be launching too late. And when I say launching too late, I don't mean, oops, we were supposed to launch in August and we didn't launch till September. But I mean a lot of the properties that don't actually start advertising until January to the student audience. The second one is going to be setting and forgetting your budgets. A lot of the times when I'll speak to operators, they say, well, my total for the year is going to be $40,000 in ad spend. And the initial assumption is to just take that number, divide it by 12, and then that is our consistent budget month to month to month. When really you want to be looking for those velocity signals. You want to be looking for when you should be shifting funds higher towards a different channel or category in order to be able to get the maximum ROI out of your budget. And then the last one for timing is just going to be missing what is referred to as the low competition window. So low competition is going to be that time through October through December. It has the hardest IOI and most properties will skip it. That will be when you actively have parents that are on campus helping their students move in for the first time and also looking for potential different places to live for their children for the next year. It's going to be the time when like retargeting will get you a lot of return on investment because you have people coming in late, like transfer students as a good example. And then the next pitfall that we're going to talk about here, that is going to be channel mistakes. So channel mistakes that in theory can sound like a good idea, or they will just end up draining your budget based on the time of the year. So the first one we can talk about is just an over-reliance on ILS platforms. And essentially what's happening is you are paying to compete directly against your neighbors. So they'll click through a non-branded ad, come through to the ILS platform, and all of a sudden all of your comps are right there with all their pricing right next to you. And then it makes it potentially harder to actually get them to convert on the ILS platform when it comes to student housing. The next channel mistake is going to be not using video or display presence. And what is kind of an interesting twist is that we will see that the Gen Z tends to be a lot more involved with video medium and photography medium than they are necessarily with just going to Google and doing a Google search, unlike their parents. And so what happens a lot is display, especially display that you can put video on or put a lot of different pictures that you change throughout the season. They can help really sell a message and send people and get them back to your website, which then falls into our third channel mistake, which is the lack of retargeting. Retargeting should be happening all year round. You don't ever want to drop it off. It's going to do the work for you. And then our third mistake that can end up draining people's budgets is going to be just audience blind spots. Audience blind spots that are not going to give you the conversions that you want to see on your website that help you turn your leads into leases. So the first one is just going to be ignoring the parent. There are typically two decision makers when it comes to student housing. The student is going to be part of that decision and their parent is going to be the other part, especially if they end up being a guarantor to actually sign the lease for the property. The second one would be generic creative that just does not convert. So just talking about things like a brand new pool or private rooms for them to study. Those aren't always the first or top of mind when it comes to the audience, when it comes to students, or when it comes to parents. A lot of the times they're looking more for how far is it to campus, how safe is the property, and how are they going to care or manage for their student, for their child, while they're actually paying for this lease for them. And then the third is treating all students the same. So a freshman is going to want different things than a junior is going to want. Freshman's typically going to care more about, can I get to school real quick? Is it very close to campus? And then a junior might care more about, do they have places for me and my 4 friends to all share a room together? Do they do roommate matching? Do they allow that? Do they even offer it? So these are all different things that can end up killing conversion or end up being a complete bust when it comes to the leasing season.
Absolutely great points, especially when it comes to ignoring the parent. Got it. I see a lot of marketing driven towards the students, but at some point in the pipeline, we have to get in front of these parents, right?
Agreed. It may not even be a big moment in front of the parents, but it's still impactful enough that they need to be considered in the journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then that's going to bring us into some of the student housing leasing trends and what we can actually expect this season. This is always kind of a big one. Everyone wants to know how it's going to work, if pre-leasing is going to end up looking the same, how is rent growth going to look. So just to give you a couple ideas about things that you can look for, we'll dive in here. Enrollment forecasts, they're typically going to tell you what the ceiling is when it comes to velocity. So national enrollment growth for the season at universities ended up being a 1.8% growth. Now, there's going to be certain states or certain markets where that is actually a decline, some that's going to be higher than that, but this is the overall average. When we take a look at national effective rent growth year over year, we can see the steady decline that is really leading in from the fact that enrollment growth is decreasing over time in institutions. So in 24 to 25, it was almost 6%. And now looking at this year, our rent growth is 0.9%. But when we're taking a look at everything in the market and trying to understand what really is motivating the market and what are some of the potentially hidden factors that could be causing a low pre-leasing percentage, these are a couple examples of some issues where data can only tell you so much, or data needs to be full or robust in order to tell you the entire story. So the first example I'll give you here is UCF in Orlando, Florida. So Florida had a 3.2 college age population growth, but they also at the same time had 1,800 new off-campus beds delivering. So essentially that was a wash for UCF. In the opposite spectrum, we have NC State here in Raleigh. Now, North Carolina had a population decline of 1.5%. However, there was a huge push to high school seniors in fall of 2025 for this current decision year, a push for them to be rerouted or to go to community college instead of four-year institutions. So what this slide is really telling you is to not only just look at demographics, because universities are highly affected by things like policy decisions and affordability, transfer pathways, recruitment strategies. So all of these data points can be used to really help give you a clearer picture of the forecast trend. And this leads us into a handful of things that you can really control. And one of those is going to be Google Ads best practices for the upcoming peak season. So the first thing I want to talk about here is going to be branded versus non-branded campaigns. We hear about this a lot. We hear about people talking about, oh, search impression share or lost impression share. And this is something that I want to drill down a little bit into about when branded really works well for you and when non-branded should really take more of a center stage. So branded is really important and really popular when you are a new lease up property or you're even in year one or year two of being completely new to the market. It's really important if you're going through a rebranding or a brand change or any kind of reputation recovery. It's also important when it comes to helping build your organic brand search, especially if it hasn't established yet and you're not hitting that first page of rankings. When it can be beneficial to reduce some of the dependency on brand, not eliminate it completely, but reduce it down to a lot less budget than what non-branded campaigns would get. You would do this when the property's very established. So they've been open for at least 2 years. Their organic rankings also strong. You can also do this if you feel that you are paying for traffic that may have found you for free. And again, this always is going to come back to organic, which also is tied into SEO, which is very important. So some of these things, if you put a little bit more time and investment into SEO, then sometimes you can pull a little bit back on brand. So there's a little bit of that ebb and flow when it comes to it.
Great point, Kat. Especially when it comes to reducing brand, we definitely don't want to put a ton of credence behind it. But I do see often if we completely pull branded, well, that's just opening up your competitors to bidding on your name. And if there's no other bids on it, they're going to show at the top of the page, even above your organic rankings. So definitely important. I'm glad you touched on that.
Agreed. So let's talk a little bit about how you can spend the budget and on what and at what time. So as we take a look through here, the student housing leasing cycle can really fall into 3 categories. So we will start here at renew and reintroduce. So from September to January, those are typically going to be your peak months. It's peak for renewals, it's peak for new students. So you want to make sure that you are running lots of retargeting, that you are running lots of high quality video footage on social channels that are either reintroducing your brand to people who've known you from the previous year or introducing you brand new to the people who have never heard of you. The last thing you want to do is leave it up to Reddit to tell you, to talk about your property and how it works for students that live there. And then as we get into February, we're looking at the same thing. We still want to be reintroducing and retargeting, but we want to be recapturing. So that's the big retargeting point. February, March, April, most students are looking at making a final decision. They're talking with their friends if they're going to do roommate matching. And then as we get into May through August, it's really just a lot of retaining and keeping everybody and keeping your brand top of mind with them so that when they are ready to make their final choice and they go back through and they look at all the different properties in front of them, they know to choose yours.
Great points. I think it's worth noting as well that this can be a little bit market dependent as well. Depending on, one market might lease up quicker than another market does historically. But these are all things that your agency or your marketing department should be able to help with. And I think it goes back to what you're talking about as well, Kat, with the flighted budgets. Don't just divide your yearly budget, by 12 and then decide that. Let's flight them out. Let's spend more on the months where we know we're going to be really high impact to make the biggest impacts for the future.
Yeah, that's right. And it really goes into your point too that you made talking about giving us the leasing journey, the leasing data. So that is also another piece of information that we'd be able to take next to budgets and then say, here is how you should fluctuate your budgets from month to month.
Exactly right.
Landing page alignment. This is a pretty big one. I see ads just hit the homepage most of the time. And the homepage isn't necessarily a bad place to land people to the website, but it can not always be the predominant place that you want to land them. A lot of the times, if someone's interested in a floor plan, for example, they should be landing on the floor plans page. If someone's been to your website before and they're being retargeted, they really should be landing a little bit deeper down the website journey. So think a contact page or a tour page if they have been to the website before. I see this a lot in advertisements where everything just gets landed on the homepage and it's kind of like a one and done, but really this can even flex and change throughout the year based on what sort of seasonality your leads are in.
Absolutely great points, Scott, and I appreciate that. So I think it's worthwhile talking about some website items here for a little bit. So bear with me as we go through this. But the first thing that I do want to talk a little bit about is transparency on the website and why that wins compared to the lack of transparency on the website. So at the end of the day, transparency is a conversion strategy. I know there's all this talk about compliance and everything when it comes to making sure that our pricing is completely on the website and everything is listed there. But it also comes down to converting our guests, our potential students on our websites. And so the highest impact areas here are going to be your pricing. What is your rent per floor plan, your bedroom type, your lease term? How available are your particular units at the moment? And so just making sure that we have transparency on all of these. What are the layouts? How many floor plans do you have? It reduces friction by being transparent. It's going to build trust within these students and ideally improve our lead quality over time as well. So moving on to, sorry, what was that, Kat?
No, I was just going to say transparency is huge, especially with Gen Z. It's one of the main things that they look at for when they visit your website and even when they see your ads. So it's a great call out.
Absolutely a great point. Especially, students they're comparing multiple properties at a time. They're not just looking at that one property. So making sure that if, the competitor has everything on the website and yours doesn't, well, then it's not a one-to-one comparison. So we really want to make sure that everything on the website is exactly as it should be. And we're not hiding any information. I see a lot when it's, call for pricing and things like that. Well, this age of student, they can get everything online within 5 seconds. They can ask ChatGPT. They can do all sorts of stuff. They don't want to pick up a phone and call unless they absolutely have to. And if the competitor has everything on the website, they may opt for that, especially if it's, they're 2:00 in the morning, they're looking for apartments. They're definitely not going to be calling you around that time. So definitely want to make sure that we have all the information readily available on our websites. So again, floor plan visibility, it does directly impact your website conversions. I see all the time where there's no information on the websites. It's sending everybody to a phone call. You can't find anything online, and your conversion rates just aren't going to be that strong. You're spending ad dollars for something that you can't track or that you have a lack of insight into because you don't know how many people might be calling you. Right. So we absolutely want to make sure that our rental rates are on there. We have real time or very updated availability on the website. If you do have a sold out, that's totally fine. Put up a wait list. So at the very least, we can get their information. Perhaps we can call them and say, hey, we actually don't have the one you were looking at, but we had another one open up that particularly might work for you. So make sure that we are being as visible on the website and as transparent on the website as possible. Again, what hurts conversions, like I mentioned a second ago, is that call for pricing. We absolutely want to make sure that if we can, we have that pricing on the website or at least tied into your ILS so that it's pulling that pricing for you. On the next screen here, pricing transparency is becoming more of a legal and trust expectation with all of our consumers, especially in the students. So a little bit of a checklist here for you all on the pricing transparency. But at the end of the day, the best practice is show the clearest possible picture of what their expected costs are, not just for legal reasons, but also for transparency reasons. Increase your conversion rates, drive as many leads as possible so that we can fill up your spaces as quickly as we possibly can. One thing we wanted to include is a little bit of a checklist. So feel free to, I know Sarah's going to send out this as well, but if you wanted to screenshot this, have this yourself, go through, make sure you can check off all of these things. If you can check off all of these, then you are good to go. If not, then that might be some hidden opportunities there for you. Okay. The big one, the moment probably everyone on here has been waiting for, is to talk a little bit about AI and how to win visibility in this new day, this new age that we have. It's the talk of the town. So let's dive on into it. So in today's time, as we all know, everyone is using more discovery channels than ever. Google search is still a huge one. It's still the biggest one out there in terms of the traffic that's being driven from your website. But we are overarchingly seeing more traffic from Google Maps, more traffic from AI overviews and ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, all of these different sorts of LLMs. What's huge right now as well, Kat, I don't remember the exact statistic on this. We'll have to maybe send this out later, but I think TikTok and Instagram, I think more of the Gen Z audiences, they're going straight to TikTok and straight to Instagram to search for things instead of going to Google these days. It's absolutely insane.
They are definitely, but we know who still searches using Google, right?
The parents.
The parents do.
That's absolutely right. So as important as all of these channels are, that you really have to focus on all of them together instead of just focusing on one channel. And so the new reality is that people are searching in different ways. No longer are people searching, student apartments near OU. They're searching for student apartments near OU with a pool and a dog park, right? They're getting very, very, very specific with it, which means we need to be more specific on our website about what we have, what we don't have, and just as much information as we can. Again, this goes back to the transparency on the website. All of the LLMs that we have, they're going to read your website, and the more information you have on there, the more visible you're going to be on these LLMs and these new AI overviews and all these new search functions.
I'd rather have them pull in a link to the website in an AI search summary than a Reddit thread. That's for sure.
Yes. It's funny. It does seem like Reddit is just probably the number one source for a lot of the LLMs.
A lot of crawling. Yep.
Absolutely. So AI search, at the end of the day, still depends on extremely strong SEO foundation. So all of the things that we've been doing for the last several years to make our websites crawlable by the Google, the Yahoo spiders, whatever, the Ask Jeeves spider. I haven't talked about Ask Jeeves in forever. But I forget about that one.
That was a throwback.
It's a throwback. I like to have fun with it. So it still relies on all of the foundations that we've already been doing with a few little tweaks here and there. So the biggest thing that we want to make sure that your website has is a crawlable website content, clear floor plan and pricing pages like we've talked about, our local SEO optimization. So that's your Google business listings. That is your Yelp listings. Believe it or not, Foursquare is still a thing. So we want to make sure that your Foursquare listing is accurate. It's up to date. It has the right address, the right website address, your phone numbers, everything like that. So making sure that all of those listing aggregators are still up to date and active is extremely important, because the more content that's out there, the more these LLMs can pull when it comes to visibility for your property. A big thing is making sure your FAQs are relevant. Put a lot of FAQs in there because, like I said a second ago, people are asking these LLMs, hey, does this one have a pool? Does this one have a dog park? Does this one have a gym or a movie theater? I know some of these have these big 200-foot screens by the pool. It's absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm. But we want to make sure your website has that information in text content so that these LLMs can read that if someone is to ask a question like that. That's only going to help your visibility there.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of testimonials too on websites. If you're able to get them, they add a lot of value and they also help feed the LLM crawling.
Great point. Fantastic point. So more than ever, SEO does matter. It really, truly does. And a lot of the back end factors for SEO are still the same. We just have to go a little bit of the extra mile here when it comes to making sure that our content is still strong on our website. So here's another little bit of a checklist for your website content, for your local and reputation signals, as well as your authority and discovery. But the bottom line is, the websites and the properties with the clearest, most complete digital presence are going to be the easiest for prospects and, at the end of the day, our AI friends to be able to find. Website readiness. So we've talked a lot about the transparency on website, and there's a little bit about this in here as well, but I wanted to show a nice little website readiness pyramid for everybody to talk about what's important on a website. So the first thing here is going to be this little number one here, this technical performance. So this is the back end of your website. This is the header tags, the markup, the schema, all of that in the back end that's really telling in code to Google or these LLMs what your website actually is, right? But that also comes into the speed of your website. The faster your website loads, the better your website's going to perform in the eyes of AI and Google and all of these search engines. So extremely important. We always want to make a website look beautiful, but how does it actually perform at the end of the day? It's so, so important. Okay. The second one here is going to be your user experience. This is the usability of the website for your students or for your parents. I see a lot of the times when a website, you have it on your desktop computer, it looks great, but then you shrink it down or you view it on a mobile and the mobile page isn't optimized. I think something like 85-90% of traffic these days is coming from mobile. So we want to almost be a mobile first design, definitely focus on the desktop, but we almost want to be mobile first in our designs. I see often where, you've got your little hamburger menu and everyone's using, these little AI chat bots and everything on the website. Well, you click the hamburger menu, which is those little 3 lines, and some of your links might be covered up by those AI chatbots. And so we really want to make sure that when we're building these websites, let's move those chatbots on the other side so that it's not blocking your menu. Because we see all the time, people land on the website, you're using these heat mapping tools and people can't actually click on what they need to click on. And we want to make it as easy as possible for the users to convert. And the fewer clicks that they have to click or do in order to get to what we want them to do, which is a conversion, the better. So our conversion paths are also extremely important when it comes to making our website ready. How quickly can we get them from landing on the website to either filling out a form or starting an application, right? So try to shrink that down as much as possible. We don't want 15 clicks before we get their information. We want to get their information as early as possible in the process. Okay. Content and trust, we've talked a lot about this, but just filling up your content, again, the more content you have, the better searchability these LLMs and Google spiders are going to have when it comes to showing you online. And then last but not least, here we have our optimization. Once you build a website, it could be great day one, but 30 days later, something has changed in the algorithms, or some code might be out of date, or maybe you're using a plugin for your maps or your floor plans or something that's now out of date. Continually optimizing your website to make sure that it's up to speed and that all of these LLMs can actually crawl your website is extremely important as well. You can add one little chat bot and all of a sudden your menu, is a little out of whack. So we always want to be checking these things and always want to be optimizing our websites. Okay. And Kat, I will hand it back over to you.
All right, I'll give you a little bit of a breather here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about creative that converts. So it kind of ties a little bit into what we were just talking about with the website today and getting people to honestly stay on page and land correctly on the right page. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the content and the messaging strategies. So first up, we really are trying to take a look at specificity over lifestyle. So stop selling a lifestyle and start selling a decision. And what this means is you're going to have to actually change what your content and what your ad categories look like throughout the whole leasing season. There's things that will get scrolled past very easily. So staged lifestyle imagery is an example. And then there's going to be things that make people stop in their scrolling journey. And we know, since so many of these students are on social sites and they search, probably well over 60% of their searches are on social sites as well. That means we want to do everything we can to get them to actually stop scrolling. So things that are going to do that are distance to campus in minutes, price per bed by floor plan. Things that are going to give them a lot of upfront information without getting a little too verbose on the ad, but enough upfront information that actually makes them want to click through and that drives that click through.
Okay, what do you think about, I know the lifestyle imagery it sometimes doesn't convert as well, but what do you think about, sometimes we get a new development that's set to launch. We don't have any photography yet. What do you typically recommend we do in those situations?
In that case, photography is one entire thing, but messaging is another. You can still talk about all of the great amenities that your property has in order to get them to pique their interest enough that it gets them to walk in the door and actually take a tour. One of the really nice things about lease up properties when it comes to student housing is that they're the shiny new penny on the block. So a lot of students don't have opinions about them, and you're not going to find a bunch of information deep in a subreddit. So instead, what's going to happen is people actually have to show up on site and they need to, take a tour through and see what the community is like. But winning with messaging is going to get them to your property.
Absolutely. Great point. I think some of that messaging could be even a lot of these new developments, the worry for these students is it going to be ready in time? Am I going to be stuck in a hotel for a couple of weeks? And,
Yeah.
I know in the past, sometimes what we'll even do is just run ads with the construction photos. Here's where we started. Here's where we're at now. It will be ready. And just making sure we're messaging that is so important.
Yes, I agree. Here, what we want to do is message more for the moment and not necessarily the season. So your creative is something that should always be changing based on where you are at within the moment. So when we take it back to the seasonality here and the retain and renew and reintroduce and recapture, we can take a look at how messaging should be changing throughout these different seasons. So instead of saying, oh, it's like summertime, so we should just be featuring pool imagery, that's what everyone is going to be featuring. Instead, you might want to talk about how it is kind of getting a little bit late in the leasing journey. If you haven't secured a spot now, you may want to. And then being very upfront and transparent on your ads about what is actually available. Do you provide roommate matching if it's someone who just couldn't find a roommate and so they're dragging their feet towards the end of the year? That's just one very specific example that you would do for a messaging change at that sort of May through August timeframe. And then of course, as you go throughout the rest of the seasons, that messaging is going to change based on the moment. Then urgency is a huge one. When we talk about urgency, we want to make sure that something is actually urgent, is actually true. And in student housing, there is always a lot of push for urgency. But Gen Z can really tell if something is not actually urgent. So a couple examples of fake urgency would be a countdown timer. This is your last week to do X, Y, and Z. But then we notice that the countdown timer tends to reset every single Monday from week to week. When there's limited spots available, but there's no number dictating how many spots are actually still available. Some real urgency messaging can look like the following. So we have 6 2-bedroom units left for fall move-in. It's very specific. It's right to the point. And if that hits the right audience and it aligns with them wanting to be in a 2-bedroom, it is more likely to get a click through than if you're just saying handful of beds available, as one example. And then at the end of it, we take a look at measurement and attribution. We started this talking about all of the data that we really need from leasing teams in order to really get the full picture. So let's talk a little bit about tracking what drives leases. And the first thing we're going to talk about is how we can measure success. So student housing conversions happen offline, and most CRMs never really connect back to what channel sent who and where. But our attribution framework closes that gap so you can know exactly what's going to be helping to move pre-leasing. We see people take a look at advertising as just building awareness. Oh, we're just building awareness, promoting our brand. But we also can help people impact by coming to the website, scheduling a tour, and then typically that is where you see the gap. An application is submitted and a lease is signed. A lot of the times properties will say, oh, well, it just says property website in my CRM, but we know that the truth is a lot deeper than that. So some of the core KPIs that we can take a look at are going to be pre-leasing percentages versus goal. Those are some of the metrics that not only can you manage in-house, but you can manage through the partnership with your advertising vendor to be able to let them know how far that needle's moving with pre-leasing as you're working on the advertisements and advertising for them. Cost per lease and closing rate are also good. Having like a really high closing rate is really indicative of good quality. So if the quality is very high in the traffic that's being sent to the website, you should be seeing closing rate go a lot higher. Some of the secondary KPIs are going to be some things that we manage or dictate as an agency and other things that you may talk a little bit more about in your own property specific marketing calls. But we have things like tour request volume by channel, like what is actually sending me the highest volume of tours or contact form fills even. And then you can take a look at what's my ILS lead quality versus my direct website leads or the ones that convert in the CRM under property website? How is that quality? Is there more in one than the other?
Awesome. These are great points, Kat. And I really like talking about this attribution gap here. I know one thing that not a lot of people tend to know about is just in Google Analytics, you can actually see that attribution gap for the multi-channel funnel distribution. So you can actually see, the first person came through a paid search click, the next one might have been organic, and then two sources later, it could have been a direct website visit or even an email campaign that the property sent out. There's so many ways to see that. One thing that we have here at OuterBox is our loop tool, where we can actually see that from start to finish. And what's even cooler about it is it will track the phone calls. It'll give you coaching on the phone calls, and it'll tell you, what that person was interested in, and if that turned into a lease or not. So really, really cool to have that.
Yeah. Being able to see all of that too helps you understand how long that decision cycle is. One of the things I talk with people about all the time is that you're not buying a pair of shoes. I add to cart, it's done. I could just click through on one ad and already be showing the end result of the checkout. But in housing, it's not only is it more expensive or a luxury item, right, technically, but it's harder to track through when we have page breaks happening on the website. And that's one of those, lots of conversation needs to be had around strategy, quality, engagement rate, and everything to really kind of take a look at the entire user journey and how often they come back to the website.
Exactly right. Absolutely. Totally different than just going to Amazon, clicking that little buy now button, and you're done. Right. A lot more decision making happening in the background here.
If only.
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Uh-huh. So how do you read the data that you actually have? Because not every metric in your dashboard is going to tell you something useful for the moment or the period that you're in analyzing. They all have their purpose and they all have their place. And sometimes it is beneficial to talk about certain metrics like impressions or click-through rates. And sometimes it's more beneficial to talk about metrics like pre-leasing percentage, closing rate, how many contact forms did we have, anything really that's going to generate a guest card, for example. So those would be things like tours and contact forms, and someone starting an application where they have to enter all the information, and then a guest card is generated in the CRM for the property. All of these are going to shift based on what is most important for the season that these students are in for leasing. There's usually not as much urgency in the retain and renew phase, just because people have either already decided or your retargeting is doing a lot of the work for you and getting people to renew. And so a lot of times early on, you may be focused more on the volume of traffic that's getting to your website, but later in the year, you may be focusing more on how many users are we getting back and having them make a final decision on us. Are we really closing the gap in our pre-leasing versus applications actually physically closed out?
So I love that it keeps circling back to the remarketing, making sure we're staying in front of people throughout their decision-making journey.
You have to. If you're not going to do it, a competitor is going to do it, and then you're just going to be behind.
Absolutely right.
And then that brings us to what is considered a vanity metric versus a lease driving metric. And this is what I talked about a little bit before in the previous slide. They do have a purpose, they have a place, but I don't want to be talking about impression volume 12 months out of the year. I do want to talk about it when it's important, when it makes sense in the data that we're having the conversation around. I want to talk more about tour request volume by channel. I want to talk more about, do we have more people starting applications this year than we did the prior year? I want to talk more about how much is it costing us per lease and not necessarily per lead. And this also harkens back to the initial slide Zach talked about when we're talking about working with the team's site data and making sure that all of that is coming together to paint the clearest picture possible.
Absolutely. I know that, there's kind of an overarching theme here of everything that we've really talked about. And it really is just understand your reporting and make sure that your websites are set up for success. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that I do want to offer for our attendees here today is if you're interested, if you just want somebody to look at your website, no strings attached. Shoot me an email. We will do a website readiness audit for you. We'll tell you what's working on your website, things that you could change, and from there, zero pressure. But please feel free to reach out if you would like to. And now we'll move on to Q&A. If anyone has any questions, Sarah, I saw you pop back on. If you had anything else to add.
Yeah, and I've had some questions come through, so I'll pose those to the group in the second for y'all to answer. But yes, I know Zach just shared his email, and I'll make sure that it's called out in the email that I send tomorrow. It comes from my personal email, so y'all will have a direct way to reach back out, whether you want to reply to me or take Zach's email as well. And then it will also have the recording and the presentation, like I mentioned. So we did have a couple of questions come through that I took note of during the presentation, and then feel free now to put them in the chat if you have any additional questions based on the conversation that we just had. So the first one, I know we talked a little bit about branded search. So this one said, how do I know when my property has graduated from needing a heavy branded search spend? Like, what are those indicators?
That's a really good question, honestly. So there's a lot of things that you can look at. One, if you are working with a vendor that is also doing your SEO, you can take a look at your organic rankings so you can see where you're hitting on the page. That's going to be the first step that I would take. Typically, you can see that within Google Search Console. Another thing you can look at is you can look at your branded search impression share and then how much of it is being lost to competitors. These are all really good metrics to take a look at. But again, never take a look at just one or two of them side by side. Take a look at all of them and then look at the story that all of that data tells. We're never really saying turn your branding for your paid search keywords off, but we're saying if you just started and now you're a year in, and at first it was, 40% of your budget going to brand and 60 going to non-branded, you may want to reevaluate that split. It may look more like 10 to 15% and then 85 to 90 non-brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Another question that we got that came through was, for my property that's already behind on pre-leasing compared to last year, what is the first lever that you'd pull as we approach kind of the heavy student leasing season just around the corner?
Yeah, that is also a really good question. It always gets challenging too when we're this late in the year, and we're behind that far in pre-leasing. At this point, students and parents, if they're still within the decision cycle with their children, they are this close to making a decision. So what that tells me is retargeting is going to work very well. And then also paid search is going to work very well. A lot of the times they're going to just like go back and they're going to take a look and see, like I'm going to pull 8 of them up across my screen and see which one I'm making the final decision on. And the more you are subtly influencing them, especially through retargeting, it's going to lean more in your favor when it comes to actually obtaining those last minute leases.
I think it's worth adding as well. We're getting to the time frame where it's just so much more competitive online. Your ad dollars aren't going to go as far. And so as much as I try to find, smart ways to get in front of more people without having to increase budget, Google wants to get paid. They want you to pay them to get in front of them. And so that's why I always like to look at the non-branded impression share. Like you mentioned a second ago on branded. That's also important on non-branded is what is the percentage of budget that or percentage of impressions that we're losing due to our lower budget. These are all things that your agency or your marketing team can look at to determine what your new budget should be to try to get in front of more people.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, those were the two that I had come through during the presentation. I haven't seen anyone else chime in on the chat, but speak now. We will stay for a couple of minutes, or I should say type now. If you have any other questions, and we can get those answered too. I know we've got a little bit more time dedicated to the webinar. But just as we're waiting for those to come in, thank you everyone for attending today's conversation with Kat and Zach. Definitely excited to share this information with you all. We'll be following up via email tomorrow. My email it'll come from, and then Zach's email will be included. And then we also have some additional student housing content coming over the next couple of weeks, which we're very excited about. The biggest one being a corresponding white paper that you all will receive in a few weeks. So stay tuned for just more great content from the Outer Box team.